efficient-o with that
like,
outro.
Let's move it along.
Shifted into fifth and did not slow down.
I live my life 1/4 mile at a time.
You're listening to The Janchi Show, hosted by 3 Korean American adoptees diving headfirst into what it means to be adopted, Korean American, and more. And now, here's your hosts, Nathan, Patrick, and KJ.
What is up, everybody? It is your boy, singular, KJ, coming at you with a quick intro for this episode. It's just me because we didn't schedule a time to record an intro, but never fear, this is a full episode. We got a guest, we got a snack portion, we got a fantastic interview with Sara Docan-Morgan. And man, it's just one of those episodes that was like, I wish this could have lasted forever, and I can't wait to share it with you. We get into all sorts of stuff, from being in reunion to living in Korea with your family and what all that means. So I'm not going to hang out. I'm not going to waste your time. I just want to jump straight into the episode because it's really, really good. So without further ado, let's roll that tape.
Welcome back to the Janchi Show interview time. We are really excited today to be here with a very special guest, Sara Docan-Morgan. So thank you so much for joining us all the way from Wisconsin.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Although I do live on the Minnesota side, so I embrace more Minnesota-ness than Wisconsin.
Nice.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
I have a lot of ties to both Minnesota and Wisconsin. So, yes, like all our shows, thank you again for joining us. We usually start off with allowing you to tell us as much or as little about your story.
Sure. I was adopted in 1976 when I was 4 months old to my family. It was my mom and my dad and my sisters, who are 6 and 10 years older than I am. They are not adopted. And so I grew up with them in North Dakota and South Dakota. And suffice it to say that there weren't very many other people of color in my communities growing up. And I didn't really grow up with the network of Korean adoptees that a lot of people in Minnesota, particularly the Twin Cities, grew up with. And so that was obviously a defining feature of my childhood. But the other, I think, defining feature of my childhood was that my adoptive mom, who was a really wonderful person, she got sick when I was about 12 years old. She was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And then when I was 16 years old, she had a stroke, which paralyzed her left side of her body. And so I think that when I think about my growing up, that her illness, and then me kind of, at that time, my sisters were out of the house and, adults. I think that being a caretaker to a sick parent was just as defining as being a Korean adoptee, and also inseparable from my identity as a Korean adoptee, because I think that any sort of perhaps abandonment or sense of alienation that you feel as an adoptee, I think, was compounded by the fact that I was always sort of afraid that she was going to die. And then when I was 24, she got really, really sick, and then she passed away when I was 26. And then 5 years later, my adoptive dad, he died in a motorcycle accident. And so by the time I was 31, both of my parents had died. And so I think that people often say, oh, you grew up in North and South Dakota, and that must have been hard. And while it was hard, I think that it was perhaps even harder to have, my mom be sick. And I think that, perhaps because of that, or maybe it was just my disposition, I think that a lot of my life I've struggled with trying to be good. There's that Mary Oliver poem about the Wild Geese poem that a lot of people quote, but the first line of it is that you don't have to be good. And I think that reading that poem for the first time was really remarkable for me, because I think that I always thought that I had to be good, and that I engaged in a lot of the magical thinking of, maybe if I'm really good, then my mom won't die, or, maybe she'll get better. And I think we all engage in magical thinking. But so while I have the same kind of perhaps like identity journey that a lot of adoptees have, I think that for me, that part about my mom being sick was just as important in my development. And then with regard to the adoptee stuff specifically, my family was very loving and very supportive, but they also just didn't have the tools to know how to deal with adoption and loss and all of those things. But I think that my mom's sickness eclipsed a lot of that stuff too. But she really made it a point when I was a senior in college. She found out about, it was called Journey 1999 at that point, but it was a trip to Korea hosted by the Korea Society for 2 weeks. And it was all expenses paid except for the plane ticket. And it was really, really important to her that I go on that trip. And so I went, and 2 weeks in Korea first time, and it was great. It was fantastic and hard and wonderful. And then actually in 2001, I was living in California at that time. I was doing Teach for America, and the phone rang one day. I wasn't home, but my roommate, who's also my best friend at the time, still my best friend, but she came home and found a message on the answering machine, which was a landline at that time. And it was a woman who said, "Hi, I'm calling from Lutheran Social Services in Minneapolis, and I'm calling for Sarah. And we have information from her birth family. So if she could give us a call back, here's my number." And I had not done any type of search. And in fact, I really didn't have it on my radar at all because my mom was so sick at that time. And so I eventually called her back, and she said, "Your birth family came in here and they want to send you a letter, and they'd like to pursue additional contact if you're open to that." And I think that at the time I was so not thinking about it that it felt a little bit scary and almost intrusive. Although now that I know my family, I know that that wasn't their intention. But we exchanged a few letters and some photos. But then with my mom dying in 2003, then the grief hit me really hard, and I just wasn't ready to meet them. So I actually, ended up, I moved to Seattle. I got my PhD. I got married, and then in about 2000, it was probably about 2005 or 6, I remember saying to my husband, "Now, I think I might like to look into being in contact with my birth family." And he said, "I think that would be great." And so then we started emailing, and then we didn't end up going to meet them until 2009. So from the time that they contacted me until the time I actually met them was, 7 or 8 years. And I do feel guilty about that. And at the same time, I don't know if any of you have seen the film Between Goodbyes. It's a beautiful film. It's by Mun, who's a Korean adoptee, and it features Mika, Mieke. I forget her last name. I think it also starts with an M. But she was adopted to the Netherlands. And similarly to me, her birth family contacted her rather suddenly. And she and I have become friends just messaging online a little bit. And she had lost her adoptive parents also. And so then she ended up meeting her Korean family right away. And then it felt like too much. They came to the Netherlands and they had a really good visit, but it just felt like too much for her. And then she wasn't in contact with them and didn't contact them back for something like 7 years. And it actually gave me a lot of comfort because it legitimized that it was such a big, momentous thing that I had to be ready for. And so we've been in reunion since 2009, and I lived in Korea from 2016 to 2018 with my family, my husband, and our 3 kids. And that was really nice because when you go to Korea as an adoptee and reunite, you sort of, I think, feel like a spotlight is on you. And every day and every meeting feels like such a big deal. And when I lived in Korea for those 2 years, we could see each other casually, like meet up for a meal and then say goodbye and, know that we were going to see each other soon. And that made it feel much more like a family relationship. I think that's probably a long answer to your question. But yeah, glad to answer anything else or chat about other things that are interesting to you.
Thank you for sharing all that.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you for sharing all
Yeah.
that. I'm like, where do I?
There were so many nuggets that I was like, I saw both of my
yeah.
co-hosts taking notes, and I was like, oh yeah, okay, I want to ask about that. And they got it. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing.
You mentioned early on in your story about that you were trying to be good, and I was just wondering what your definition for good was in that context.
Mhm. I think that for me, it meant a lot of things. I think it was definitely likability, but also likability as being tied to making everybody around me happy and comfortable. I think that it was things like grades. I think it
Mm.
was things like popularity. I think it was things like morality, as defined by white evangelical Christian standards, even though my parents weren't particularly uptight about that kind of thing. I think actually I got involved in the church when I was in high school, like deeply involved in like church youth group stuff. And I think that gave me a clear definition of what constituted good. And I think that was helpful, and I'm using air quotes in the sense of like it's very clear like what good and bad are in an evangelical Christian context. And so it was like not drinking, not swearing, in addition to getting really good grades and doing all the extracurricular stuff and being on student council and all of those things. That it didn't really hit me until I was in college, my senior year, and I just was so sad, and I didn't really know why. And I went to see a counselor at my mom's request, and the counselor just said, "You're just trying to control everything." And I think that, my thought unconsciously, of course, was that maybe if I could control everything, that I could also perhaps control things that weren't even within my control. But also I think, tying it to the adoption stuff, if you are adopted and you're standing out and you feel like you don't fit in, if you can get a lot of external validation, that almost is like the Band-Aid, on top of that. So I think that was probably what it meant for me. But, it's been really interesting, now that I'm a parent of 2 teenagers, my twins are almost 15 years old, it's like, wow, I never, they're good kids, obviously, but, it's like, wow, like I never fought with my parents or, talked back or, you know what I mean? Like that kind
Yeah.
of thing. But I think that one of my, I've seen different counselors over the years, and it's been incredibly helpful. And one of my counselors said, like, that's a very normal, healthy thing for teenagers to be able to do, is to test those boundaries. And you never got to do that. Because I
Yeah.
was always afraid that if I remember feeling like if I said something mean or had a fight with her, that it could be the last time. Yeah.
I appreciate you sharing that. And the reason I asked is just because I feel like your story, I really resonated with it because I have, for all intents and purposes, a positive adoption experience from what people would assume a good relationship with my parents. And thinking about when you were talking about like trying to be good, like I was just thinking about my own experience, was like trying to be accepted, trying to do the thing, but instead of, I like what you bring up about control, because I think I was trying to control the image, which was essentially a facade, because I could project goodness. Because I also got deeply involved in church youth group when I was in high school as a way of shielding or safeguarding said image, and
Mhm.
I could internalize what it meant to be good because I could find myself participating in these things, but at the same time, I was also, I didn't realize it, but just starting to spiral in terms of identity and really grappling with what it meant to like reject stuff, even though I didn't know that's what was going on. But for you, it's like it's just so tied to this burden of trying to keep someone alive, not just like, oh, I just need to show these people that I can do good so that they'll continue to love me, they'll continue to keep me here. For your experience, it goes a step beyond that because you're like trying to like, if I don't do this, it is someone's life in my hands. And I feel like as adoptees, like we're already carrying an immense burden, whether we're kids or we're in college. And so to just think that that was the additional layer or weight that you had to carry to navigate the world that way, I think is just powerful to share. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. And I think that you don't realize what you're doing until retrospectively. And
For
you
sure.
also don't necessarily realize how, I think you realize on an intellectual level, but not maybe an emotional level, that the way that you're going through life and navigating the world isn't how a lot of people are. Because especially like as an adolescent, you're so like, you know, se- egocentric, the sort of I'm the central character in the story that's happening kind of thing.
Right.
But I think, it wasn't until when I was in graduate school, I went with my good friend to just visit her family for a long weekend in California. And I remember sitting in the back seat of her parents' car, and her dad was driving, and her mom was in the passenger seat. And they said we had just gone kayaking in the ocean, and then they said, "Well, what are we going to do next?" And the mom was like, "Well, I don't know. We're loose as a goose." And I was like, "Wait, what?" Like, we just did one thing, and with my mom you could only do one thing, or and it was definitely not ocean kayaking. And then she would be tired, but they were like, well, we could go to a movie, or we could go for a little hike, or we could go get some food, like, I think that we've all had that sort of version of events where it's that realization that the way that you grew up, whatever the circumstance was not what other people were experiencing similarly, I guess. Yeah. But then at the same time, as an adoptee, also finding out that people were navigating similar things, like on this show, you have so many similar themes with the different guests too. So there's, I think, that duality of uniqueness but universality, I guess, in all of our experiences.
Yeah,
Bar
100%.
uniqueness but universality. We gotta put that on a shirt.
So you said something while you were sharing your story. You brought up magical thinking, which I listened to a podcast
Mhm.
called Magical Overthinking. So I just need to make
Mm,
sure that I like get my definitions right.
love it.
But I think in the context of your story, if I'm understanding correctly, you're talking about like if I'm good enough, then I have some control over the situation that I find myself in, right? Like that's the
Mhm,
magical thinking of it.
probably.
Um, and I'm curious, like, has that continued? Has magical thinking been like in the background of your mind, or in the forefront of your mind in adoptee spaces and like related to adoption, maybe pre reunion with your family, or I mean, or post? Because I wonder, like, I don't know. I probably have to not during this episode think about like my own life and kind of go back through my mind to be like, am I a magical thinker? Was I doing that? And I know to some extent probably all humans are, but yeah, just curious about like how that has continued to live on, or if it hasn't, if it's stopped since that time.
No, I think it continues to live on. I think that I do the same thing with my children now. I am probably, I think my husband would say too sometimes, like, that I'm hard on myself as a parent. And this idea that, like, okay, well, maybe if I, am a really good parent and I don't make any mistakes as a parent, then that will keep them safe and alive. Or I don't know. I mean, I think especially as you become a parent, if that's part of your journey, and I know it is for the three of you, it is this idea of like, I will do anything, I will do anything to make sure that you're okay. And it's hard not to engage in magical thinking as a parent, you know? So I think it does continue. I think I try to be more mindful about it. I think I've learned a lot about self compassion over the years. I do a lot of yoga, which probably cliche for someone of my vintage at this point in terms of like age and class and being a
I imagine
professor.
it's probably really good for being in your body, though,
It's
right?
really
Yeah.
good for being in your body, and it's really good just the practice of observing your thoughts. That's a lot of it is
Mm.
to dissociate, um, unattach your thoughts from who you are and unattach your thoughts from thinking that they're necessarily reality. So I try to be more mindful of it, but I still do it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting that you bring up the idea of like being hard on yourself, because I remember one of my friends in college is like, "KJ, you're really hard on yourself." I'm like, "Am I?" And then like since then, I've been like, "Oh God, I am." So again, kind of that universality of what we go through, either from other life circumstance or adoptees being the things that bind us. I'm curious too, kind of switching gears. When was the moment that you connected with the adoptee community? Was that before you went back to Korea, or went to Korea, I guess, to meet your family? Was it before after your adoption agency called? Like, what was that like?
So I think that it was very intermittent. I think that so when I was, I think, a senior, right before my senior year of high school, my mom also had heard about Camp Tiger, which is not in existence anymore, but it was one of the Korean adoptee cultural camps in Minnesota. And I remember kind of being like, why is it such a big deal that I go to this? And my mom was just like, you have to go. And so I went and I had a great time. I think it didn't exactly occur to me. And I think that that would have been like 1994, maybe. But I think it was still, you know, in many ways, the idea of a Korean adoptee community because of, you know, demographics and age was still a little bit looser than it is now in terms of like, this is who we are. And not that it's one thing now either. But so I feel like that was my first kind of point of contact. I think that I had the same self-consciousness that a lot of adoptees had growing up and not wanting to be associated necessarily with other Asian people or other Korean adoptees. But then I think the thing that changed things actually for me was going to Korea in 1999. But then I also in 1999 moved to Arizona and went to the University of Arizona for my master's degree. And at that time, I don't even know exactly how it happened, but got to know some Korean graduate students, Korean nationals who were studying at the University of Arizona, and just kind of became friends with them. So it wasn't even Korean adoptee community, it was just Koreans. And that was lovely in the sense of, I think it made it more accessible in some ways because it felt like they were teaching me something I didn't know, which was true, but also it didn't feel intimidating because they were so like, oh, we want to share Korea with you in the way that a lot of Korean nationals are. Whereas in Korean adoptee spaces, I think for a long time I felt, and I've heard other adoptees say this too, I felt a little intimidated as if they all were kind of in the know and that they all knew each other and that I was somehow not belonging in the place that I would expect to find the most belonging. And I don't think I'm the only one, especially now. And I think that getting to know those Korean adoptee or those Koreans, as they say, was great. And then after that, I moved to the Bay Area for Teach for America and lived there for 3 years. And that was also a time where I got to know a lot more just Asian Americans. And so, you have these different sort of Venn diagrammy circles, right? Of like Korean nationals, Asian Americans who may or may not be Korean, most of them weren't, and then Korean American adoptees, right? But the Asian Americans that I got to know in the Bay Area, that was cool too, because it was like, oh, these are, they're Americans and they're Asian, just like me. And then when I moved to Seattle 3 years later, Seattle has AAAW, which is the Asian Adult Adoptees of Washington, which is a super active group. And then I started to get to know folks in that group. And so that kind of brought all these different circles together.
Yeah.
And so I think for me, it was very gradual finding my comfort there. And then on top of that was also becoming an academic and then finding my sort of footing and comfort with other Korean adoptee researchers and not feeling like an imposter in those spaces. So I think that was a long answer to your question, but
No,
it's very
I
much
love that.
Yeah, it's very much been a process.
Peel back one layer, and then you
Mhm.
slowly get to the
Yeah.
next layer, and then you get
Yeah.
to the next layer.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and we all have felt and expressed on the show that idea of fluency and I guess nativity with like Korean culture that is ours and definitely is not ours, and then like how important it is to have someone say yes to you and just like welcome you in. And I want to be clear because you said something early where you were like it seemed like it was, oh, the Korean nationals made it more accessible. By it, you were referring to like Korean culture, right? Or Koreanness.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Because
it's
yeah.
interesting, yeah, where they're just like, "Yeah, of course, like, let me share Korea with you,"
Mhm.
and then by contrast, Korean adoptees being like, "Oh, don't you know about, like, soju and drinking culture?" Or like, "Oh, don't you know about the food?" Or "Don't you know how to say hello?" Yeah,
Yeah.
like, as if that was learning some part of your culture became, like, stepping stones on a rite of passage to
Mm.
become fully integrated Korean American adoptee person. That's a yeah, I don't know that I've ever thought about that. I can certainly see it happening, and I've not. I guess I've been privileged to not really experience it, but yeah, I think that interplay of love, Americanness and Asianness and Koreanness and the fluency and fluidity through which one can move through those three kind of spaces, I think is really interesting. So thanks for sharing that.
Sure.
Well, we get hierarchical with it, I think, sometimes. So I totally resonate with coming into the community and meeting other adoptees, and they're like, we're here, and if you don't get here, then you're going to get left behind. And I'm like, whoa. And luckily I found these two to have helped me, like, see, oh, okay, like, it's not just, like, one or the other
Mhm.
or an absolute. It's like there are different experiences to this whole thing, and you find your people. And just because you're in the same community doesn't necessarily mean that those are your people. And all of these groups and pods of people who find themselves most comfortable with each other, or maybe the most resonant, we all then make up this large fabric of what it means to be a Korean adoptee, an Asian adoptee, or an adoptee in general.
Mhm.
So I think, unfortunately, we can play into this notion because we are discovering or reclaiming, tapping into something that we've had withheld or just didn't know about, and it feels great, and you want to keep doing it. And sometimes that the wool can be pulled over our eyes, and we can feel like now we're Superman. I don't know why I'm pulling out Superman as a reference. I've been reading a lot of comics lately, but just like we find we go from being just part of the group to being a system of hierarchy in said group.
Yeah, and I don't think it's ever intentional, but I think that when
No,
you bring together a group of people, many of whom are A, uncomfortable with maybe that part of their identity being Korean, being adopted, B, maybe have a history of feeling excluded, even if they were, accepted from the exterior, but feeling kind of out. Um, I think it's easy for it's fertile soil for those feelings of inadequacy to crop up.
Mhm.
Yeah.
for sure.
I'm going to also go back something that you kind of touched on right there a little bit about the adoption agency reaching out to you with the your family reaching out to them. I find that kind of interesting, just because I know those closed adoptions usually it only goes one direction. That's how it was with mine. And you also mentioned that you felt guilty during the time from when they contacted you to the time when you actually started kind of communicating a little more with them. I connected with my family. I had to be the first one to open the lines of communication to find them, and was they responded fairly quickly. But I feel guilty because I did it 3 years too late,
Mm.
because my mother had passed away 3 years prior to me reaching
Mhm.
out. But they had tried to reach out, and they had tried to find me during those times when my mother was still around. And so, um, just curious about kind of I mean, it's, again, I resonate with the just those different types of feeling and the different types of guilt and the different types of stories, that everyone has in, relation to reunion. Um, was there, what was some of the reasonings, I guess, and your influence to moving to Korea during that time after? Was it more to see your family as well?
Yeah. So, kind of going back to one of the things that you touched on too, is I just think it's really a sad irony that the adoptee ends up feeling guilty in these situations when so much of what happens has been out of our control. And then there's no way of knowing what the best, quote unquote, thing to do is in any moment. And so I just think it's ironic, I guess, that we end up shouldering some of that guilt when it's really so much that has been done to us, and that we can only respond or enact the behaviors that we think are right in the moment. So your question was about your question was
Moving to Korea,
moving to
yeah.
Korea. Yes. So
Mhm.
my husband and I went to meet my family in Korea in 2009. We met my my two older brothers and my older sister, and my Omoni, my mother, and then a bunch of cousins and aunts and uncles and things like that. And it went really well. I think I feel really fortunate in the sense of bringing my husband with me, who's very amicable. And as you know, Koreans love a white person. They love a white person who's like open to their culture. And so the fact that I brought him and he would eat all the things and he was down for whatever they wanted to do, it took some of the uh, spotlight off of me, but it was still very overwhelming, but it was great. And I think that my birth father, he died in the 1980s, so I didn't get to meet him. But I was very, very lucky in the sense of my brother, one of my older brothers, had told my Korean mother before I got there that he said, she is American, so you cannot expect her to act like a Korean daughter. And I think that his awareness of that, and then him setting that expectation for our mother, was just a, complete lifesaver.
That's huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so for him to have that awareness, and then, I think with my Korean family, and I don't love this word, but I think it's the only word that makes sense in this case. I think I've been really lucky. They really like each other. They really get along. They're very friendly. They're very understanding. They are very forgiving. Like they feel like they had an extremely, difficult childhood and life, and they feel and grew up very, very poor, and but they still say, we feel bad because you suffered, you know. And while that's true, I also can point to piano lessons and ballet class and figure skating and, all of the things that didn't counteract the challenge of being adopted. But I think about my sister, who she's like, oh yeah, just on our last trip there, she said, oh yeah, my hearing isn't good in my one ear because I always had ear infections growing up and we never could afford the medicine or to go to the doctor. So now I don't hear very well in my ear. And so, you can't really weigh suffering against other types of suffering. But we met them in 2009, and then we went back again in 2013, and this time with 3-year-old twins. And again, now we have these 2 children that take even more space up. And I mean that in a very positive way, because I don't want to be the center of attention in these interactions. And so having the twins was also helpful in that way. And then in 2016, I was awarded a Fulbright scholarship. And so we moved there. And at that time, our twins were 6. And we also had a 1-year-old. So in retrospect, I also kind of think, like, what the hell was I thinking? Like, it's just like, this seems like a great idea. But we went with our twins and our 1-year-old. And a huge motivation was spending time with our family. And it has been really wonderful in the sense of, unfortunately, sometimes I don't know if it was a family tree exercise for my kids or something else where they were trying to write down all of their relatives and cousins and things like that a few years ago after we came back from Korea. But they absolutely, without blinking, think, well, we have, these cousins in Minnesota and then these cousins in California and we have these cousins in Korea, and it's just all part of this integrated sense of family. And I also think that because my adoptive parents have died, that also in some ways makes it less confusing for them, because they're like, oh yeah, Halmoni, and my mother, and she died actually in 2019. But I think that the fact that we lived there and they got to see their Korean family on a regular basis and to feel that love that they have for them, and then to feel that mutuality of affection, that was worth it. Even though it was much more difficult for me to live there than it was for them. Yeah. Even though I did enjoy it, it's still challenging.
Amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing all that. 2 things. One, you said that you don't like the word lucky, and when you said I don't like using this word, I immediately went into my head and I was like, I bet it's gratitude.
Yeah.
But lucky was my second guess. And then the second thing, I appreciate you sharing about like how your husband and then your kids could act as a little bit of a buffer, so you didn't have to be the center of attention as you went through this process. you talked about how the 2 years, when you're in your introduction and when you're sharing your story at first, the 2 years that you were there, 16 to 18, like part of what made the transition a little bit, or made that time a little bit easier, was that you could kind of go at your own pace with how you approached reunion, because it gave you a longer window to where the end point was, as opposed to some people who have a week or a few days or whatever the case is. Um, was there like something unexpected in having a bit longer time to breathe that made this process go differently than you thought it might? I mean, I feel like your work is really tied into this
Yeah.
experience, and so I wonder, for your own personal experience, like how did that, or what happened that was just caught you off guard, was unexpected in that
Yeah.
process?
I think that logistically, the thing that was unexpected was that, you know, Seoul is huge and it can take you forever to get from one, part of the city to another. But when we moved there, our family was placed in these faculty apartments that were associated with the university. And the faculty apartments ended up being a 10-minute walk from one of my brother's his house, his apartment. So it was a 10-minute walk from my chagun oppa, that's like younger older brother, from his apartment. And so what ended up happening that I think was a game changer was that he could stop at, GS25 or 7-Eleven on his way home from work, and he would grab a few bags of snacks and he would stop by and he would get on the floor with the kids and play and do all these things and then hang out, and then he'd leave after half an hour. And I think, and unannounced, by the way. And I
Mm,
think that casual contact was so huge in making it feel like family. One of the things that
mm,
I think about a lot and talk about a lot with my students is, as a communication professor, you can't really separate a relationship from the communication. And so it's kind of this idea of like, if you have a good relationship or if you have a close relationship, then the communication is going to be good and close. You wouldn't say, like, oh, I have a great relationship with my sister. Oh, tell me about it. Oh, we never talk. You know, you would say, if we have a good relationship, you'd probably say, oh, we, communicate and it's fairly positive and I feel comfortable sharing things with her. And so the communication made the relationship feel more family like. And despite that, I think that at the same time, another thing that surprised me that I think about sometimes is, I remember spending Seonal with my family, Korean New Year, at my mother's house, and we stayed overnight, I think 2 nights, and it was great and very positive and wonderful. And we came back on a Sunday, and I remember laying down. We had like a little patio in our apartment, and it was not carpeted, it was just floor. And I remember just falling dead asleep on this hard floor, because I think it's just emotionally taxing for me, even with how really wonderfully accommodating and kind my family always has been. I think I always, especially with young kids, was thinking like, are the kids behaving? Are they liking how I'm parenting? I can't really help with lunch or dinner. Do they wish that I could be more helpful? I joke a lot because, I'll say like, I'm a decent cook here, but in Korea, I don't know exactly how to do the things. And so I would always ask my Unni, my sister, like, oh, can I help? Can I help? And she would like give me one apple and say, could you cut this? And that would be that would be my contribution to this like elaborate spread of food, because that was all I could do. And so that was really, my usefulness at that time. And so if I think about what surprised me, it would probably be I didn't realize how tiring it would be for me sometimes. And then
Mm,
also the importance of casual interaction. Yeah.
I love that. I appreciate you sharing that. And okay, so now that I'm a parent, like something I never thought about until you just said it right there was I've found that I'm very sensitive to how I'm being perceived as a parent by anyone, including my wife. However, I've never thought about the perception of my birth mother should I ever happen to reunite with her on my parenting skills. Until you just mentioned it right there, like having even that thought, and I get emotionally drained just thinking about it now. To then add the layer on, not only am I a good parent in front of their eyes, but also all of the other layers that go with like what you're thinking and how you're presenting and how you're just trying to be in front of this person. I just am like, that's the unexpected for me now. So now I'm gonna be thinking
Well,
about that.
sorry for putting that on you.
No, it's totally
And I
okay.
think that, it was totally my own baggage because my family hasn't ever
Sure.
been really judgmental about anything, or at least they never expressed that, I should say, about anything related to our parenting or anything else really. Um, but old Koreans on the street would be. So we would have our, son
Mm,
in the stroller and they would come up and zip up somebody we don't even know and had never seen before will just come up and
oh
tell you that
wow.
he's going to be too cold and zip up his coat for you, so there is a lot of unsolicited advice and opinions that do get.
I could see
Yeah.
that. Having been back to Korea, I could see that
Yeah.
now. But I don't think that the baggage is I think the baggage is our own, but
Mhm.
I do think it's baggage from adoption. So I'm
Yes.
not placing it on first family or anything like that, but just the simple fact that we went through this process, like we now have that carry on with us everywhere we go.
Yes. Yes. How are people perceiving me? And then, you add cultural
Yeah.
differences onto it too, that, you might feel like, okay, I'm doing what would be appropriate as as a parent having been raised in the US, but it might not necessarily be what is perceived as good parenting from a Korean perspective.
Yeah, I don't know if rural Indiana parenting and Korean parenting translate one to one.
They might translate better than you
You'd be
think.
surprised, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, maybe that's
Yeah.
true.
Yes.
That might be true.
Could be spot on. Yeah, the thing that stuck out to me was especially when you were talking about Talal and all of the food traditions. Like I love anytime I think about holidays and family traditions, my mind always goes to food. And so just thinking like again, being a parent and be like, I just want my daughter to like grow up and be like, I don't know, this is just like what we did. This is just like some of the Korean things that we did when we talked earlier about like fluidity and fluency with Asian identity, just be like, oh yeah, this is the food that we made and this is what Koreans or at least what my family did on New Year's, and whatever, hanging out with hopefully some other Asian people celebrating New Year's or whatever that looks like. And but it's just so interesting to think about like, oh yeah, the weight of, well, yeah, I don't know how to make these rice cakes or I don't know how to make tteokguk and I don't know how to make kimbap because I didn't grow up with that. Certainly not in the Dakotas, but even beyond that. Yeah, so just like and then the weight of all that you said, and the way that people would perceive you and all that kind of stuff. And then totally makes sense that you would just kind of collapse on the floor and be like, I'm really tired because there's just a lot of mental gymnastics to be going through, especially at as charged a time as a holiday is, and a big holiday like New Year's. So, yeah,
Mhm.
I appreciate you
Sure.
sharing that, and I'd love to hear more about your relationship um, with. I guess being in reunion as an adoptee, like as an identity that you hold. I know that you literally wrote a book about it. So I
Mhm.
guess let's start with beyond your personal experience. Was there any greater motivation for writing the book, and can you kind of give us a high level overview of your book?
Sure. Yeah, I think that the thing that's always been really interesting to me is how people communicate about difference and how people communicate across difference. And so when I first started researching Korean adoptees and Korean adoption, I was I looked a lot at how Korean adoptees handled and experienced racism, racist comments, and then how they communicated in their adoptive families about these things. Spoiler alert, most Korean adoptees experience racism. Most of them don't talk about it with their white parents. So that's the broad overview of that
What?
study. Yes. But then when I finished with that line of research, I still was interested in this idea of difference. And this time, I went into studying reunion about a year after we met my Korean family for the first time. It was also about the time my twins were born. And I didn't know exactly. I went into it pretty inductively, meaning I didn't have this like hypothesis that I was testing. I just wanted to know what people wanted to talk about with regard to their reunion. And I think that when we think about, again, like I said before, messages being inseparable from the relationship, um, I wanted to know how people created a relationship with their birth families and if those relationships felt family like. I also was interested in how people communicated with their adoptive families about reunion and birth families. And so that's essentially, what the book is about, especially this idea of adoptees often get asked, have you met your real parents? Or do you know who your real parents are? And so there's this contradiction between, on one hand, your adoptive parents being your real parents because they're the ones with whom you've constituted a relationship with over the past, however many decades and daily interactions, kind of like I talked about earlier. It's real in the communicative sense. And at the same time, it's not real in the biological sense. And so, that's why you need legal documentation to be adopted. So it's constituted in a legal and communicative sense, but not in a biological sense. And then when you meet your birth family, I say that, and this is not really even an exaggeration, that I didn't really know what my face looked like until I met my Chagun Oppa. I didn't know really what I looked like until I saw him. And so it's a very real sense of family. And at the same time, I don't know what their favorite colors are. And I know over time, I feel like I have a sense of who they are as people. But with my sisters here, my white sisters, if you gave me a scenario and said, "Oh, your car got a flat tire on the side of the road and then a thunderstorm came up," I could tell you verbatim and, gesture by gesture how my sisters would react to that. And I think I could tell you that about my birth family, but that's after having lived there for 2 years and gone to visit them multiple times over and spending a lot of time with them. And so my book is about how do we, communicate in ways that create a sense of family, or do we communicate in ways that result in a sense of family or create a sense of family? And also, how do we manage things like cultural differences? How do we handle language differences? And so there's a chapter in the book about language and whether or not adoptees feel like they need to learn Korean to communicate with their birth families.
I just use a lot of emoji.
But a lot of emojis, a lot of Papago and Google Translate. But, a lot of what I found is that, in reunion, adoptees feel a great, and I call it discursive burden, but I feel a great responsibility to do things that other people in their adoptive family and birth family don't have to do, because reunion centers on the adoptee. So adoptees feel like they're the ones who, you know, need to, kind of like Nathan, you said that they're the ones who need to initiate contact. They're the ones who feel like they have to learn Korean culture. A lot of times, birth families, especially the parents, will say, well, I'm too old to learn English, so you have to learn Korean. So learn Korean, learn, enact Korean culture in appropriate ways. Make sure that the adoptive parents don't feel threatened by the reunion. And then also feel like they have to maintain the relationship when they're apart from the from the birth family. A lot of people in the book said, when we're apart, my birth family doesn't really contact or reach out to me. And I'm the one who has to reach out to them, to text them or call them or do that kind of stuff. And so what I ended up finding was that this idea of like maintaining a relationship and like maintaining contact is a pretty American idea, and that Koreans have more of a sense of like, you've probably heard of the term jung, like jung, this idea that like if we're connected, we'll always be connected. So I don't really need to like maintain our relationship, because we're just like, we're good. Next time you come back to Korea, if it's tomorrow or if it's in 8 years from now, just give me a call, because we're always going to be connected. Whereas in the US, we have a really strong sense of like, a relationship is like a car, or a relationship is like a plant, and you have to water the plant or maintain the car. And so a lot of, you know, adoptees felt like that was just another thing that they had to do, not realizing that it wasn't because their birth family doesn't care to maintain, but that's just not something that's not in how they define it, what it means to be in a relationship. So that was not a short overview.
That was a
but
great
hopefully
overview.
that-
Great overview.
I'm about to buy that book
mean-
right now while we're talking.
Yeah.
Man, that was so good. Is that so? Okay, I take it you're not fluent in Korean. Are you conversational?
No, I'm not. I took it for about
Okay.
6 months when we lived there at a hagwon. I was me and some Japanese housewives. I was absolutely the worst student in our class. And it was, the story that I always tell is that, I had been taking it for a few months and feeling like I was getting better. And we were in a park one day, and it was, me and my husband and our kids, and these, sort of probably middle school aged boys, as they do, started coming up and talking to us because they saw my husband, and they wanted to practice their English. And so I started asking them questions in Korean, like, oh, how old are you? And what's your name? And just very basic questions. And my husband was just joking around, and he said, Hana, dul, set, 1, 2, 3. And these kids go, whoa, like they were like floored by him counting. And I was
Right.
just like, pissed off,
Yeah.
like
I have put in
so
so much effort.
that is so not fair.
Yeah.
But I now that we're back here and I can't practice as much, I tell everybody I speak parent Korean, which is like I can say things like stop it, hurry up, let's go. And those
Yeah.
are a lot of the phrases
Haja,
that
haja.
a lot of the phrases get thrown around at our house.
Yeah. Well, and the reason I ask is because I hear you refer to your biological family members by their like your relationship to them, I guess specifically, which I know is just like a Korean culture thing, and I wonder, like, you talked about being like medium is the message, unable to separate the relationship from the communication, and like we are learned early on in our show like the concept of filial piety and like how important it is to place yourself in the right space in in that relationship. So like, do you I don't know, like, how does that affect your relationship to them while talking about, like, I don't know what their favorite color is, or I don't know, like, what their likes or dislikes are necessarily in the same way that you would know, like, to the T, what your adoptive sisters, what their mannerisms would be, all that kind of stuff. Like, does using those terms help place you in I guess, a type of headspace in your relationship with them? Does it help them relate to you in a specific way?
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, that is one chapter or one section of the book where I asked people what they call and what they refer to their Korean family and their adoptive family as. And people would say things like it is that they would call their Korean parents like amma or appa, and they wouldn't call them mom or dad. And one person said, "Mom means more to me than amma. So I would never call my amma mom because it has a different emotional weight." And so the language difference actually was helpful in the sense that it gave them different terms of reference. I really like calling my Korean siblings by their familial titles. And it works out well because I am the youngest daughter. And so my brothers don't have anybody else to call them oppa. And my sister doesn't have anybody else to call her anni. And so it almost feels like a special thing that I get to use for them. And and I really love when I hear them introduce me to other people as dongseng, like little sibling. I think that it gives us another way to feel connected and to constitute that relationship. So I really love that. And I actually kind of have to pause to think if I need if I need to recall their first names, you know?
I love that.
So yeah.
I actually made that mistake, though. I was calling my siblings by their first names as the youngest
Mm-hmm.
as well, and later learned that I guess that's not proper etiquette, that it was in a way challenging their authority or something.
Yeah.
So,
Kind of like an American kid calling their parent by their first
exactly.
name,
Yeah. And
you
that
know?
was a
Yeah.
cultural thing that I wish I had
Yeah.
known before I was doing it. But
So many things, so many things.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I love what you said too about just the little things like that. The knowing stuff about your biological family as well. More so than knowing about your adoptive siblings. I feel that same way. I know a lot more about my sister who is and also adopted as well. But I feel very close to her, but I don't feel like you know sometimes when I think about those little details about my Korean family, I was like, oh, I wish I did know their favorite color. I do wish I knew more about them. But it's just that I don't know the the duration or the time that I have. I only have one way of communicating with them, which is on an app and stuff like that. So um, one thing so with your book you wrote or you interviewed, I think it was about 16 people. Is that correct?
Yeah. 18.
18 people. And was one of them from the Netherlands as well?
No, that movie, that documentary, she's from the Netherlands,
Okay.
Mika. But I did have, I believe, 4 participants who were from Denmark.
Oh, okay.
And I'm actually speaking at the Korea Clubben gathering in
Oh, nice.
Copenhagen
Okay.
in July.
Oh,
Yeah, so I'm
wonderful.
excited about that. Yes.
So with the amount of people that you interviewed, is there like an overall, I don't know, key learning point or something that you found that maybe they all had in common or something that was a very, important um thing that you discovered from all of those interviews?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is the discursive burden, and just how much I like to think about it as like, those old magic acts or tricks where they have all those plates spinning on the different sticks. They might have, one in their hand and they're spinning it, and then they put one on their nose and it's still spinning on the stick, the plate. And that, I think about reunion a lot like that, because, maybe one task they have is trying to communicate appropriately according to Korean culture. And then the next task is they're also trying to learn Korean language. And then another one is thinking about, oh, how is my or how's my adoptive family feeling about my reunion? And then another one is just like, I'm in Korea for the first time, and how do I, get my cell phone to work, or whatever it might be. And so all of these different communicative tasks that adoptees have to engage in, and maybe it's even, for some people, maybe it's, you'd even start it. For many people, it starts with navigating the adoption agency search. And so I think that that's the big thing, is the sort of weight of responsibility to communicate appropriately and effectively that falls on the adopted person. And that at the same time, they need support from maybe the people who, that the adoptive parents need to say, hey, this isn't about me. Don't worry about me. I'm fine. You make this about you. And unfortunately, adoptive families don't always do that. And I recall one person in my book talked about how she told her adoptive parents that she had started searching, and her mom immediately started crying. And, they still have a good relationship and still had a good relationship. And she said, I felt like I was breaking my mom's heart. And then she also found out that some of her adopted siblings were having a hard time with her upcoming reunion. And so she had a few weeks leading up to her reunion, and she spent some of her time writing notes to each of her adoptive family members saying how much she loved them and how much she cared about them and was glad, to be in the family. And I just think that's a really heavy discursive burden that did not have to be there, because she should have been able to focus on herself in that moment. And she was amazing and didn't express any resentment or anything about that. But as someone from the outside, I just think that's a lot to expect from someone when they're doing this thing that actually has very little to do with the adoptive family and your relationships with them. And so one thing, I think it was Barbara Ingvison. She's another researcher of adoption, but she talks about how we have this idea of exclusive belonging for families, that you can only have one set of real parents and that you must belong to only one. And I think to the extent we can sort of get rid of that idea, and to say, I can have multiple families and they can be equally real, then I think we'll give adoptees a lot more space to navigate their relationships.
So I did a quick Google on the word discursive, and because I was like, I don't know what this word means, and it means aimless, right? Is that like,
No,
did I Google the right word, or like?
no, it's okay. Yeah, actually, it means, when we're thinking about discursive, it just means communicative. Yeah, like like it comes from the word discourse. So, and there are
Oh,
many, many definitions for what
I missed
constitutes
an O
discourse.
then, I think, in what I looked up,
There you go.
because I was thinking like discursive, like some sharing a root with like recursive, not like
Oh, sure.
discourse.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes,
All right. I was
yes,
like,
yes.
aimless burden. All right. Well, I thought I had figured it out, and it turns out I just got it entirely wrong. So
It's all
maybe it was like a
good.
good as
Yeah,
time as any to say we should probably jump to a food,
let's
because
do it.
You
I'm
need a
very
snack for your
excited
brain.
to. Yeah, I need to. My brain needs a break. But gosh, this has been an incredible
Need some
interview.
food.
Thank you so much for giving your time and your story and sharing it with us and with our listeners. It's been it's been a true joy to be able to listen.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. And, sorry if I got too heady with my academic stuff, but
No, it was great.
The book actually, I made a point in the book to write it in a way that it's accessible. So it's not a book that people are going to have a hard time reading. And I started each chapter with a little bit of my story. And so I think that gives people a soft entrance into thinking about some of the research findings. But anyway, it's very accessibly written. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
We'll be right back with another snack for the first time in a long, long time.
For the first time in a long time.
Welcome back to the Janchi Show. From a long time ago, we have not had a food portion, so we are excited to finally have another food portion. As Patrick laughs at me because I didn't know what I was going to say there.
That was good.
Hey, it's a food portion. I know some people love this, some people skip it, but hey, I'm happy to have it back in the show. Yeah,
if you skip this
I'm not going to name names
of the show, put it in the comments. I want to know your name.
But we do have a snack today. I'm excited that sorry if I butcher the name of this, but I have no clue. But it's by BioThe, and it is it says beignet on it, honey twisted donut. Then it says something which I don't know. Beignet torsade it's French. Amiel. Does anyone speak French? See if you can see that.
Oui. No.
Oh, I think miel means honey.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I mean, I definitely know it's got the honey in it. So because that's the main thing on the
from
thing.
The
It looks
English
like a little
honey twisted donut.
Yeah, it looks like one of those very small, individually packaged. I don't know, like what are those called? Braids, I guess, like a little mini braid, but this bag that it came in is huge. I mean, this is a big bag. It says it's 1.14 pounds.
That is a lot. These are about the size of like my thumb.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really hard. It's like
maybe about the size of one of Patrick's knuckles.
Okay.
What? I have big knuckles.
If you take like a knuckle joint.
No.
Yes, I ate one and it really took me on a ride because I thought it was like that. Well, I thought it was like kind of that like bad caramelized honey flavor initially, like not like a good sweet honey. And then I bit into it and I was like, this doesn't taste good. And then I was like, oh, wait, I think I like this. And then it kept going and I was like, what? And now I'm at the end of it. I'm like, I got to eat another. So
I know.
I'm left with a question mark.
It's hilarious. Started here, went down, continued down, spiked straight up, and then maybe level off. Not sure.
Yeah, I opened it and I was like, okay. And then it went immediately down and then shot back up and then leveled off into a question mark.
It's not as sweet as I thought it would be.
I was going to say that too. It's not as honey,
but it's also not
as I would expect.
Okay, it's going to sound super rude. It's not as bad as my first impression made me think that it was going to be.
So I don't know why, but for some reason it reminds me of a pretzel.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, right? I mean, I don't know if it's the crunchiness of it or the flavor, but it reminds me of a pretzel, like a honey pretzel.
I think it's kind
or
of
something.
dense, like a pretzel. It's not light like a cookie.
But it's not crunchy like a American pretzel would be either. Like it breaks apart more easily. So it feels like it's not salty
at all.
Yeah. It's like a dehydrated beignet that was twisted, I guess. It's like if you imagine like a chocolate twist donut. I mean, except instead of chocolate, it's honey. Like a honey glazed twist donut, but you dehydrate it and make it really tiny. So it's kind of crunchy, but it's still like, you can tell there's a lot of like bread up in there. That's like what it's like.
Well, I can't try it, so I appreciate.
Yeah, sorry.
I appreciate.
You can try it later, Patrick.
Descriptions of the food
when it arrives.
I have a little bit of a donut here. It's a churro donut from Parlor here locally in Indianapolis.
That sounds
they make
delicious.
their donuts out of croissants, So that is what they're known
Ooh.
for.
Oh,
So
cronuts.
when you're talking about the extra bread, I'm rocking some extra bread right here and my croissant donut.
That I'm sure is decidedly sweeter than this, because
Yes.
Mhm.
if I wanted something sweet, I don't think this would hit the spot enough. It's not sweet enough for me. If I wanted something sweet, but it is good.
Sounds
I
like a
it.
side item for another, or maybe like it's in a little bowl at a party and you're
Oh
just
yes.
picking at it.
Mhm.
I can
Yeah,
see
I mean
that.
they're so small and individually wrapped. I feel bad for the environment a little bit that they're so small and individually wrapped. But here's another thing that I always have to mention is with Korean snack products too, is the portion sizing on the nutritional facts is just crazy off. I don't know why, but we've had this problem in the past where we've sometimes looked at something and it said something like, 700 calories, right? Or something. And we thought one cracker or something that we were eating was like 700 calories or something like that.
Yeah,
Well, this
they're all
one,
having heart attacks. While we were
pretty much.
eating and
This one
reading it.
says 550 calories. And then you have to look back to see what the serving size is. And it's 100 grams. And then it says there's approximately 5 servings in this 1 pound container. But so I want to know who's eating a fifth of this container, which is technically 1 serving or 550 calories. Like why such a high, content of a serving size? That's my question.
also so much math to figure out, like how many calories is one thing.
I agree. You'd also have to be willing to unwrap all of them individually to have, you don't just grab a handful and eat them.
Yeah, I just want to know, like, I just ate 3. 2?
Mm-hmm.
I just ate 3. How many calories did I just eat? But I don't want to do that level of math. That's like calculus level
does
math.
not play
to try to
well
figure that
into
out.
the Asian stereotype of math. Being good at math.
I'm just too lazy.
This particular snack.
It
Yeah,
also
I'm not
involves
doing that.
converting grams to pounds, which I can't.
Yeah, this is America. Use the imperial system. Korea,
Yeah.
gosh.
Come on, Korea. Come on,
Convert that.
H-Mart or H
Mart or Zion Market or 99
Well, as they
Ranch.
say, you shouldn't, just don't look at the calorie count or the nutritional facts.
Yeah, it doesn't count if you don't look at it.
Yeah, right. I don't know. All right, ratings. Sarah, what would you give this on a scale of 1 to 5 beignets?
Ooh. I think I would probably give it a 3.5, because if I was looking at it and I wanted something that had donut on it, I would want it to be sweeter. But I really do like the crunch a lot.
Nice. Good review. KJ? As I'll go, you're eating. I will agree. Actually, I think a 3.5 is a perfect rating for this because it is tasty, crunchy, and not too sweet. If it was a tad sweeter or maybe thicker honey, I probably would bump that rating up to a 4. But it does remind me of a pretzel for some reason, which I like pretzels, but like a sweeter pretzel, I guess. I mean, other than the individual wrapped, bad for the environment packaging, I think, 3.5 is perfect for me.
I'm going to give it 3.75, which I know is ridiculous. Because I really want it to be a 4. But the individual packaging is super annoying for a disabled person because I just want to eat a bunch of these. But also, the honey isn't that good. And I think if there was more honey, it would actually make it worse. So maybe if there was a different layer of sweetness, that would make it better. Or if you just got rid of the honey altogether. Because I like the crunch, and it's like, it's not the same as a pretzel, but it quacks like a pretzel, if you will. So I really like that, and like it leaves me with a good mouthfeel. I have a pleasant time chewing it, and it's like a good middle to end, experience. It's just the initial that honey forward taste isn't doing it for me, and the packaging isn't doing it for me. So I really want it to be a 4, but I just can't justify the 4 level. So 3.75 for me. Patrick, what would you give your churro?
Oh, my donut 5 for sure.
Oh, sorry.
Five.
You
I'm
don't.
gonna throw a TBD on the honey pretzel snack. Forgot what
Yeah.
it was. The big
Yeah,
one.
once it gets here, you can like post it on social or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also have to mention on the side of the packaging, it's kind of funny in Korean. It says how to eat deliciously. And then down below it says with ice cream, with iced coffee, or mixed with chocolate sauce.
I was gonna ask if would you dip
Oh.
it in
Like
something?
these little-
What would you dip it in?
Yeah. So maybe
Yeah.
you could dip it in some chocolate sauce.
You
and
know
that-
I'm
or
trying to
ice
dip
cream.
stuff in chocolate.
That's
Yeah.
true.
I mean,
Yeah.
Or I
That would
generally
dip
want more
donuts, right?
chocolate.
I don't think it would be good with ice cream though, but for sure chocolate sauce or just like proper honey or that'd be good.
I could crush it up and then sprinkle it on top of ice cream. That would
It's
be
not
okay.
worth it.
Not worth
Not
it.
worth it.
Yeah.
You're gonna
You'd have
crush
to
all
open
the
so many
packages
things
up?
to make that
Yeah.
You
work.
have to open all the packages.
Eat a
up?
lot of plastic.
Sheesh.
But it's worth a try, but maybe not as much as Patrick's donut.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
When you come to Indianapolis, if you ever do, we will go get some donuts.
That sounds
We got some
lovely.
pretty good donut shops here. So,
All right.
That sounds lovely.
Sarah, thank you so much for coming on the show
Thank you
and
guys
for
for having
waiting
me.
1 to 2 or maybe even 3 years for us to respond to your guest.
It
Been
wasn't.
10 years.
For people that want to find you, follow you, support you, and then want to get your book, how do they go about doing that?
So on Instagram, I'm at in.reunion. And then my faculty page at UWL is just my name, Sara Docan-Morgan, no H on Sarah. And you can just Google that with UWL and find me there. And my email is there as well.
All right. Well, we're going to link those things in the show notes. We'll link a link to your book as well. The book is In Reunion. Make sure you go get it. KJ has already ordered his based on this conversation. And yeah, it's just been a really fantastic opportunity to sit down and talk to you. And I think we're all walking away from here wishing we had about 3 more hours to unpack all of the questions from the notes that we took. So
Well, thanks,
Thank you.
guys, and hope to meet you face to face soon.
For
we'll make it happen. Wish we were coming out to Denmark, but
I know, right?
Or whatever.
No big deal.
Is that in the
Yeah.
Can we put that in the budget?
Just get a
Is
few
that a
fewer
business?
snacks. and
Close.
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
good.
that's true. No more snacks. We're just going on international trips.
Denmark first, then
yeah.
Korea.
I forget how to end this with a guest. So thank
Just
you.
our
You
social-
can,
That's fine.
nope. You can follow the Janchi Show on all of our social platforms at Janchi Show. Send us an email, janchishow@gmail.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a rating or review, or just tell a friend and say like, "Yo, this episode was great. Sarah is fantastic. Want to be your friend in real life? Then you should listen to it." You can whatever, go to janchishow.com if you want. I'm at KJ Roelke, wherever I want to be found on the internet. Patrick is at Patrick in the World. Listen to his other podcast, Conversations Piece Pod on the socials, and Nathan is N Nowak or Nathan Nowak on Facebook. Probably still. You're still there, right?
Barely. I'm barely there. but
All
yeah, I'm
right,
there.
great. Sarah, once again, thank you so much for coming on to the show. Listeners, until next time, Janchi. Hail.
Heyo.